The sun rose over the small town of San Rafael, bathing the silent alleyways and the old stone church in golden light. But on this day, it wasn't a priest who stood there. It was Clint Eastwood, a retired legendary actor who had settled in this peaceful spot a few years ago. He wasn't much of a talker, but everyone knew that when he opened his mouth, it was to say something that mattered. Respected for his uprightness and simplicity, he lived modestly, spending his time tending his vegetable garden, reading old newspapers, and chatting with the village elders. That morning, however, the atmosphere was strange. A rumor was circulating. A group of powerful investors wanted to buy the land around the sacred forest to build a gigantic tourist complex. The spring of pure water in the old oak grove, considered by the locals to be the soul of the village, were under threat. The local authorities seemed lost between the desire to modernize the town and the fear of betraying their history. A few neighbors came to see Clint, aware of his quiet influence and unerring instincts. He listened in silence, frowning. They were still just rumors, but his intuition told him something was wrong. Shortly afterwards, a man in a smart suit appeared at his home. He claimed to represent major investors and promised wealth and jobs for San Rafael. But behind his smooth words, Clint sensed the threat. The project will go ahead, with or without your approval. He didn't like the tone. A week later, heavy machinery began clearing the forest. The villagers tried to question the workers, but no one could give a clear explanation. The mayor asked Clint to calm things down, saying that economic growth would benefit everyone. But Clint was not an easy man to convince. He knew that some progress hid irreparable losses. He decided to conduct his own investigation. He consulted lawyers, professors, and experts in environmental law. He discovered that the forest was protected by special regulations and that it contained traces of 19th century missionaries. It was sacred land, not only for its ecosystem, but also for its history. Clint began to speak publicly at neighborhood meetings, sharing what he had learned. He spoke of dignity, justice, and the memory of the elders. Older people remembered how their forefathers had planted the first trees, and younger people began to organize to defend what they considered sacred. But the tension was mounting. The machines continued to advance. Some residents gave up in fear. Not Clint. He knew that if he didn't act now, all would be lost. One morning, law enforcement officers came knocking at his door with documents questioning the ownership of the land. It was, he thought, a maneuver to weaken the opposition. He realized that the fight was becoming legal and that he would have to face it almost alone. He rummaged through archives, old maps, and old stories. He slept little, driven by an iron determination. In a nearby convent, he came across old missionary writings describing the forest as a priceless natural sanctuary. It was a turning point. The village got organized. Vigils and prayers were held near the machines. The investors stepped up security. The mayor kept insisting, it's for the good of the town. But Clint knew the price would be too high. One day, an old lady, Doña Sofia, brought him a family diary. In it, his great-grandfather recounted how he had helped plant the first trees. Reading the yellowing pages, Clint felt a knot in his throat. This wasn't just a piece of land, it was the very soul of San Rafael. As rumors of political corruption swirled, Clint assembled a group of volunteer lawyers. Together, they prepared their case, but the company said the documents were too old to have any legal value. Finally, a court convened an urgent hearing. When the day came, San Rafael was abuzz. Residents flocked with placards and prayers. On the other side, the investors' confident lawyers arrived smiling. As they entered the courthouse, Clint felt a chill. There were whispers that the judge didn't like environmental causes or popular figures. But Clint didn't flinch. He had the missionaries' letters, Doña Sofia's notebook, and more. It was now or never. Just before the hearing began, a court employee approached him discreetly. A surprise document could be presented, and it could change everything. The judge entered, austere. He demanded clear arguments. The investors' lawyers argued that the forest had no historical or ecological value. They called Clint sentimental. But Clint spoke up, calmly, and told the story of the land. Then came the surprise. A forgotten official document resurfaced. It classified the forest as protected heritage. The judge asked for verification. A few minutes later, An expert confirmed the authenticity of the archive. The effect was immediate. The judge suspended all work. In the room, some wept, others hugged. Clint remained silent. It was only a battle. But he knew that the war had shifted. The once skeptical judge now seemed to recognize that there was a legal basis for protecting the forest. As he left the room, Clint Eastwood was surrounded by locals who thanked him warmly. He replied soberly, "It's not over. Stay united." In silence, the construction company's lawyers left, their faces closed. The next day, rumors spread that regional politicians were putting pressure on the court to restart the work. Some even spoke of threats against those defending the forest. Clint felt a weight in his chest. He knew this was only the beginning of a long and dangerous battle. After the hearing, he gathered the lawyers and community leaders in a small meeting room. The temporary suspension of construction was celebrated, but everyone knew it wouldn't be enough. The historical and cultural value of the forest had to be irrefutably proven. Lawyer Alvaro suggested collecting testimonies from village elders and old photos. The elderly responded immediately, bringing out old boxes full of yellowed photographs, handwritten notebooks, and precious mementos. The photos showed processions through the woods, open-air masses, and prayers by the sacred spring. But ominous rumors were circulating. Unknown men were prowling near the homes of Clint's supporters, no doubt trying to intimidate. Despite this, Clint refused to hide. He continued to appear in public, speaking, listening, and encouraging. One day, he went to the construction site accompanied by a young journalist named Geronimo. Geronimo filmed the red markings on the trees, a trench near the spring, and the machines still working despite the suspension order. The videos, posted on social networks, provoked indignation throughout the country. Taken by surprise, the mayor remained silent. The company tried to justify itself by claiming that it was only a matter of maintenance, but nobody believed it. The next hearing was fast approaching. Concern was growing. Without new evidence, the machines would resume their destructive work. On the eve of the hearing, a hooded man showed up at Clint's house with an envelope. "There's something big in here," he said, before disappearing into the night. Clint opened the documents. Evidence of bribes, falsified reports, and direct links between certain elected officials and investors. This was no longer a simple land dispute, but a veritable network of corruption. As scared as he was, Clint knew what he had to do. He had to bring these documents to justice, even if it meant confronting powerful men. The next morning, Sunday Mass was full of emotion. Few knew what Clint held in his hands, but all prayed that the truth would triumph. He felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. The fate of the forest and that of so many families now depended on him. The San Rafael Forum was packed. Clint entered calm but firm, with confidential documents in hand. The company's lawyers seemed confident, ready to discredit any new evidence. When the hearing began, the company's lawyers insisted on refocusing the debate on land ownership, dismissing allegations of corruption as rumors. It was then that Alvaro took the floor on behalf of the community. He presented the documents and bank transfers linking the investors to the politicians. A murmur ran through the room. The judge called for calm, took the documents, and asked to have them examined. The company's lawyers cried for forgery, but the judge announced that he would first check their authenticity. Then a middle-aged woman stood up at the back of the room. She said her name was Clara and that she had worked in a public office. She had been forced to file documents attesting to the forest's legal protection. With tears in her eyes, she handed the judge a USB stick containing the files she had saved before they were destroyed. The room was stunned. Clara declared that her department had received orders from higher up to erase all traces. The judge ordered an immediate halt to the work to allow time for a thorough examination. He explained that if all this was confirmed, the case would be passed on to a higher authority. The company representatives turned pale, while the villagers sighed with relief. Clint, on the other hand, remained vigilant. He knew that touching such power networks could be dangerous. As he left the courtroom, people thanked him, but many wondered, would the retaliation come? Clara soon received threatening phone calls. Clint called the police, but their action was limited. The faithful began to take turns protecting her. The mood in the village alternated between hope and fear. Shortly before another crucial hearing, Clint received a mysterious call. A voice said he had even more proof, but wanted a discreet meeting, fearing for his life. Clint hesitated. Was it a trap or the missing piece of the puzzle? He agreed but didn't go alone. With Alvaro and two trusted associates, they set off at night in a discreet car. The dirt road led to an abandoned house. A faint light streamed in through a window. Alvaro advised caution. They entered slowly. Inside, the witness, face hidden, trembled. He declared that he had acted as an intermediary in the corruption scheme, but that his conscience wouldn't let him sleep. He handed over a USB stick containing audio recordings and lists of bank transfers. Clint felt his heart pounding. If all this was true, he had definitive proof. But before they could react, powerful headlights lit up the house. Engines roared outside. The witness panicked. "They followed us!" Alvaro quickly hid the USB key. Clint motioned for everyone to sneak out the back. They ran through the undergrowth, pursued by fast footsteps, shouts, and the creaking of branches. Fortunately, no bullets were fired. They reached their car and sped away. Once safe, the witness disappeared into the night. Clint, in the back of the car, looked at the USB key clutched in Alvaro's hands. He knew this wasn't the end of the nightmare, but perhaps at last the beginning of the end for the corrupt. They got out of the car and saw a hooded figure beckoning them in. The atmosphere was tense, with only the wind cracking the dry branches. The interior of the house seemed to have been abandoned long ago. Dirty walls, damp smell, broken furniture. The man trembled, looking around nervously as if he feared the arrival of someone else. In a hesitant voice, he explained that he had documents linking high-ranking politicians to illegal payments aimed at getting the project approved. He also claimed to possess audio recordings proving the bribes. Clint Eastwood, calm and direct, asked him his name and why he had decided to talk. The man confessed to having been an intermediary in these dubious affairs, but guilt gnawed at him. He'd rather risk everything now than keep silent. Master Alvaro took the USB key the man was holding out. According to him, it contained recorded conversations and lists of bank transfers. Clint felt a chill run down his spine. If all this were true, there would be no doubt corruption was real. But before they could analyze the contents, powerful beams of light shot through the windows. Engines were approaching at high speed. The informer panicked. "Someone's been following us!" Alvaro hid the USB key in his jacket. Clint motioned for the group to duck. Loud voices ordered them out. Fear was visible on every face. The hooded man pointed to the back door and shouted for them to run. Already the intruders were forcing open the main door and breaking a window. They fled down a narrow corridor, reaching the back of the house. The moon lit up the undergrowth. With no other choice, they ran through the bushes, footsteps and screams echoing behind them. Fortunately, no shots were fired, but the danger was palpable. They finally found the dirt road in their car. Panting, they climbed aboard and started off without looking back. Once in safety, the hooded man told them he didn't think the reaction would be so quick. He wished them good luck before disappearing into the night. Alvaro checked that the USB key was still there. Clint, sitting in the back seat, silently thanked God they'd made it out alive. Now they had the ultimate proof of who was pulling the strings of corruption. But it also meant they had become targets. At dawn, Clint met up with Alvaro and Clara to tell them everything. Clara was shocked but relieved that the USB key had been saved. Hope was reborn. Perhaps it would be enough to bring down the network of corruption. They had to act fast. Every minute counted. They decided to take the documents directly to the judge and ask for official protection. Clara and the other witnesses had to be placed under legal protection. That very afternoon, they went to the San Rafael courthouse. Rumors of the assault were already circulating, and it was rumored that Clint Eastwood had damning evidence. As soon as he entered, he was surrounded by journalists and villagers. He calmly replied, "The truth will come out in the end." Meanwhile, Alvaro and Clara discreetly handed over the USB key and documents to the judge. Surprised, the judge called in a computer expert. The hearing was suspended for a few moments while the files were checked. The tension was palpable. Some of the faithful were praying, others were trying to peer discreetly through the doors. Finally, the judge returned, his face grave. He declared that the recordings and transaction lists appeared authentic. One could hear the voices of businessmen, municipal and state officials conspiring to impose the project at all costs. The audience was stunned. Many put their hands to their mouths, dumbfounded. The company's lawyer clumsily defended himself, claiming that the company knew nothing. But the judge officially announced that he would be requesting criminal proceedings with the support of the public prosecutor's office. He added that the safety of Clara, Clint, and the other witnesses would be assured. The room applauded discreetly, relieved. Some hugged Clint, mixing tears of joy and restrained anger. The judge declared that the proceedings would remain suspended indefinitely. Any attempt to resume would be considered a contempt of justice. For the first time in a long time, San Rafael was regaining some hope. As evening fell, a reporter asked Clint if he wasn't afraid of reprisals. He replied calmly, "Having faith isn't about not being afraid. It's knowing that it's worth standing up for what's right." The locals greeted him with emotion. They knew the investigation would be long, but for now, the forest was safe. The spring water was flowing again, and the ancient trees were still standing. It seemed as if the community of San Rafael was gradually rediscovering its roots and its history. But Clint Eastwood, though pleased with the progress, was not letting his guard down. He knew that there were still many complaints to be investigated, and that his testimony would still be crucial to the outcome of the trial. In public meetings and interviews with local residents, he reiterated the importance of never looking away in the face of injustice. He often said, "Faith isn't just about praying in church. It's also about acting with righteousness and defending those who have no one." Letters of support began to pour in, from other regions and even from abroad. Priests, religious, and citizens moved by the story sent messages of solidarity. It was said that a bishop from a neighboring diocese was planning to come to San Rafael to salute the courage of Clint and the people in their defense of the local heritage. Some religious leaders remained wary of his involvement in legal and political matters. But Clint simply replied, "Protecting creation and denouncing corruption is not out of place for a believer. It's a matter of civic and moral responsibility." Gradually, other voices joined the cause. State authorities set up a special unit to examine the names mentioned in documents linked to bribery. Local officials were dismissed, businessmen had their accounts frozen, and suspicious transfers were analyzed. Rumor had it that Mariano Cuevas, the man who had first tried to convince Clint, was now on the run, wanted as an accomplice. Despite the tensions, the people of San Rafael felt stronger. With every appearance, Clint stressed the importance of courage in the face of injustice. It's when we allow ourselves to be dominated by fear that evil triumphs. Good is powerful if you dare to believe it. Simple words, but deeply moving for those who had almost lost everything. But one last doubt remained. Even if justice was moving forward, some feared that, in the shadows, the powerful would continue to maneuver to evade the truth. Large sums of money were at stake, and we had to remain united and vigilant. The day arrived when the announced bishop finally visited San Rafael at Clint's invitation. An open-air mass was held near the spring. The locals decorated the place with flowers and wooden benches. The atmosphere was reminiscent of the old processions cherished by the village elders. The mass was attended not only by the local faithful, but also by visitors from abroad who had come to meet the man who had dared to defy corruption. In his homily, the bishop praised the dedication of Clint and the villagers. The church needs pastors who protect their flock, not only within the walls of the temple, but also where the people suffer. Many wept as the songs echoed among the saved trees. The bishop blessed the spring, a strong symbolic gesture, reminding us that this pure water was never to be tainted or sold to the highest bidder. Looking at Clint, he concludes, "This story shows us that faith and truth walk together, and that a people united for justice is capable of anything." After the ceremony, the bishop pledged his support for the ongoing investigations. It comforted the people to know that they were not alone. In the days that followed, the forest remained untouched, and life returned to normal. Curious tourists began to visit the village that had stood up to a corrupt giant. Instead of luxury hotels, small family-run inns were encouraged, more respectful of the local culture. Legal proceedings were moving slowly, as they often do, but the vigilance of the people prevented the case from being forgotten. Politicians and businessmen were summoned, even if many gray areas remained. The old system of impunity was showing its first cracks. Clint continued his work with humility. He listened, advised, and repeated to those who doubted, "God does not abandon those who seek the good, No matter how hard the trials, the light always shines through in the end. The elders especially found strength in this quiet faith. Every morning seemed like a gift. And in the end, what San Rafael had really learned was that true faith is not limited to the church. It manifests itself in the attitude towards injustice, in the courage to say no, in the will to protect what is sacred. No one would forget the threats, the sleepless nights, the tears held back. But unity and courage had shown that even the worst obstacles could be overcome. And the spring, symbol par excellence of this story, continued to flow joyfully. As if celebrating the rebirth of hope, families began to stroll by again. Grandparents recounted how, thanks to a simple, determined man, and thanks to the people, something that seemed lost had been saved. Faith and courage can change reality, even in the face of the darkest powers. And while the truth may sometimes be hidden, it always finds its way out in the end. Protecting our cultural and natural heritage is everyone's duty to pass on something precious to future generations. What San Rafael had experienced was not just a legal victory, it was a lesson. When a people defends what is just and sacred, the impossible becomes possible.